Welcome to the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. This particular episode will be dedicated to the continuing presentation of Qatsyr-Harvest with Shabuah, being the next ingathering of God's people. Should you be curious, we are running 5 different types of programs concurrently. We have news programs. We are covering in our Ocean Studio the story of Dowd as he told it in his Psalms, the Mizmor of Dowd. It's a series called Coming Home. Downstairs in our spa studio, that rainbow studio with a beautiful background, we are devoting it at the moment to appalling Twistianity, so that we can clear away the myths pertaining to Jesus, such that Dowd is seen as the Messiah and the Son of God in his rightful place as our Savior and King. And then here in this studio, the library studio, we're presenting a series on Chokmah Choter that is, exceedingly important for our time and for our situation, while also discussing this series, which is on the Qatsyr-Harvest featuring Shabuah and also Towrah. We will, before long, add a 6th type of program, one we've already started, but I have stopped just because it's a lot to try to process at one time, and particularly when we move from a studio like this one without a teleprompter to the studios with teleprompters, is the ongoing story to discredit Islam, to prove that Allah is not a god, that Muhammad was not a prophet, and that Islam is not only a death cult, but that the plague of Islam has sought to perpetrate apartheid and genocide on Jews for all 1,400 years of its existence. And so we will return before long to additional programs devoted to disproving Islam. So that's a lot to cover concurrently. And I would also like to share that last night, Leah and I were perusing our YouTube channels. And when you look at YouTube, there is, oh my goodness, there's an enormity of content between these hour-long programs devoted to these various subjects. In fact, we've done previous ones on Dowd's song, In the Garden, solving puzzles, a open letter to Israel. So many series that have come before this that are powerful and insightful. Muhammad's Criminal Enterprise is another. That the content there between these long programs, which were all live streamed in their original broadcast, but also the mini shorts, as well as a plethora of marvelous songs that are presented on the YouTube channels. My guess is that at this point, there is probably in the range of 600 hours of video and audio content. And that's even prior to the time you look at the audiobooks that are presented there. So we have really created an enormous amount of content, and we are conveying it in Facebook, which is kind of our preferred place to hang out, because when we do a live stream such as this, there are some 5,500 friends and that are part of our Facebook community, and all have access to the chat room that is contemporaneous with and adjacent to these live broadcasts. And a typical show like this will have 200, sometimes even 250 comments from listeners. That's a fun place to be. And questions are asked and answered there as well. But we also live stream these programs, and they're retained on X. And X is an interesting place because it's really quite combative. It's the place where anyone who wants to speak on behalf of Israel and Jews earns combat pay, because it is a very, very tough environment. But it is the marketplace of ideas at this point, even if the vast preponderance of them are wrong. And in addition, so we have Facebook, we have, I think it's now 5 YouTube channels. There's the Craig Winn, there's Yada Yahowah, there's the YAHOWAH blog, Shmar Emeth is another. There are numbers of these channels on YouTube. We also have a prolific voice on Rumble and on Odyssey. So lots of places to reach out. I'm sure that Telegram, Instagram will be places that we will begin to communicate before very long. And I hope to get more active on YouTube because, well, we have had so much attention invested in X and in Facebook up to this point. There hasn't been as much time to pursue larger audiences there. But we do know that we have a unique voice. There is no one in the world who has come to know Yahweh by name and share his name and the proper pronunciation with his people, or to explain why it is so important that they give up Hashem and G-D and Lord and begin to convey Yahweh's name as it was originally pronounced and is written within his Torah and his prophets. I am the first also to recognize that there was no Jesus, and that myth was based on counterfeiting Dowd to David, and that David was the one who was crucified in 33 CE during his second of 3 lives. He is the former and returning king of Israel and will be the king of the world. He is also the Messiah. He is the very Son of God. And he explained all that he was going to do 1,000 years before it occurred, right to the exact day that he would accomplish it, so that we should have, as a people, as a nation, recognized this long ago and realized that Jesus was nothing but a product of identity theft, never existed, and that the entire myth was based upon the person who is exceedingly real and exceedingly important to our lives, particularly if you want to spend your eternity with God. So we also have something that is different than any of the talking heads that you will find on any of these social media channels or anyone that's in the mainstream media, and that's the wealth of books like these that sit behind me. Every statement that I make to you, I prove and provide copious amounts of documented research to show that these conclusions are verifiable, and that in this light, there are well over 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 profound insights that I've been able to deduce about God, his people, and our relationship to them and to him, as well as to future and past events that are unheralded, that were completely unknown, never shared prior to the compilation of the books that you see behind me. So this is a very rich and enlightening experience to be part of the YAHOWAH blog and to be part of those who have read the books that are offered freely at yadayah.com. There are occasionally, on a rare occasion, a person that you'll find who has written a book. Some maybe even have written 2 or 3, but I've written 35. They average 700 plus pages a piece, some 825. And so there's just a wealth of knowledge. And the books are all serious. The ones that teach about Yahweh from his Torah, from his prophets, and from the Psalms and writings, they all are based upon a literal and expanded, amplified translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, correcting the Masoretic text, both of the diacritical markings and also of those differences with the 1,1400 year older Dead Sea Scroll collection. and doing so in an amplified fashion where the basis of every rendering is presented within a parenthetical so that you can copy and paste it into a search engine and validate the accuracy of that translation for yourself. It's a style that no one has ever used, and it is exceedingly effective at teaching, at enlightening, at conveying important insights. And that's all there for you at yadayah.com. Applications that I have of the pain of these translations. And even if you are a native Hebrew speaker, benefit from these. In fact, you may benefit than even a native, because modern Hebrew is comprised of about 20% the original verbs and nouns and grammatical format that the Torah was delivered in. But some 30 to 40% of modern Hebrew is unfortunately deduced by rabbinical corruptions. And they are always wrong about God. And then the rest is variations, particularly of English, since uh, so many things that we use and discuss today were not relevant going back 2,500 to 3,500 years ago. So the vocabulary is deduced from English, not only because of the influence of English speaking people over the last 100 years, but also because it is the lingua franca of the world and that of the most Jews anywhere in the world. So that is a little overview of who we are and what makes this exceedingly unique. There is no voice like this anywhere in the world, and it should not be surprising to you as unique as what we are sharing is. I mean, no one has ever done what I've done and excoriated Islam to hold Islam accountable for its war against God's people, writing 5 volumes that prove that Islam is a complete farce. Here's one of those 5 volumes. This is volume 5 of a series called Goddamn Religion, also free at yadayah.com. The best documented, most comprehensive chronological presentation of the Quran and the Islamic Hadith, comprised of Sunnah, ever written, and based entirely on the words of Allah and Muhammad and their first companions. It excoriates Islam. There's nothing credible about it, and I prove it. But I prove it to defend Jews, so that it makes it far more difficult for Muslims to abuse them. It is the salvation, really, of Israel in the fight that it's in now, because their war is not against Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah or Islamic Jihad or the Islamic State. Israel's war is against Islam. And then there are 35 books under the heading of Yada Yahowah. The program we're going to do today is based on this one, Qatsyr-Harvest, and just as all of the others, this one is some 35. One of these 35 books, this one is 825 pages. And in here, you'll see the amplified translations that I've spoken to you about, and then the comments and the insights that can be deduced from them. Because while the text of Yahweh's Torah, prophets, Psalms, and writings has been available for between 2,500 and 3,500 years, no one's understood them previously. That's just the bottom line. No one has been able to put together the whole story from beginning to end, from our expulsion from the garden to our return, from the creation account to entering 7 dimensions as part of the covenant family, to explain the terms of the bereth and how they are fulfilled by the mikre, the role that the 3 most important players in God's story each contribute to the reconciliation of God's people, Moshe, Dod, and Yada. There's nothing like it in the universe. And so God has a lot to say about it. There are entire chapters of books devoted to this individual, like the Choder in uh, Yeshaya, Isaiah 11, and Proverbs, Mashal, David's depiction 300 years prior to that, and Mashal, Proverbs 14. Um, Dod's beloved son at the most important moment in ancient Israel, which is the dedication of the home for Yahweh's name called the First Temple, spoke vociferously of the Nakri, which is the same individual that is an observant foreigner that conveys the message of God as a Zeroah, one cultivating the final harvest, so that you might know who God is, what he's offering, and what he's expecting in return. So there is a lot to learn, there's a lot to share, and that is the purpose of these programs. Now, turning to the text that we were reading at the conclusion of our last program on Qatsyr-Harvest, it reads, Yahweh is how it begins. And you need to know that Yahweh's name appears 7,000 times in his Torah, prophets, and Psalms. And it was one of the greatest crimes in human history for Jews, religious Jews, to write Yahweh's name out of his text and to replace it with Hashem. God does not respond to Hashem. He is not Hashem. He is Yahweh. If you do not know and use Yahweh's name, you do not know him. And because God's people have not used Yahweh's name, since they have erased Yahweh's name from his testimony and from their lives, God has expressly told us in the prophets that he is currently sitting this one out. He is not going to come to your rescue. He is not going to return to you and restore you until such time as you Shub return to him. So it is essential that you know and use Yahweh's name. And we know this transliteration is correct because both the ah sound and the o sound is derived from the book in which Yahweh's name is introduced to us, Torah. The o sound in Torah is from the same wah as is in Yahweh's name, as is the concluding ah sound. We also know it from the verb that Yahweh explicitly told Moshe, and therefore us, that his name was based upon, Haya, to exist. So we know that the first syllable is Yah, Yah, Torah. And if you just were curious about the O sound, then what is the single most repeated word in Hebrew? Shalom. The O sound in shalom comes from the Hebrew Wah. Yahweh will have offered by having given, Nathan. He will have provided as a gift his coal, his voice, for the purpose or for the presence of his especially capable and influential one. God speaks in several different places, and we'll conclude this statement here in just a moment. But Yahweh speaks in several different places about a call, about a voice that calls out in the wilderness of words. And at this time, when so many people are lost, God says that he is not only going to project his voice through a unique individual at this particular time, as we're now only 100 months away from his return, but that this individual would be making a raised highway, a ramp, if you will, from man's troubled world to God's perfect home. And this unique individual that is today's voice of Yahweh, just as Moshe was the voice of Yahweh, and when Dod sang his Mizmor Psalms, he was the voice of Yahweh. This is not uncommon for Yahweh to project his voice through men. Well, it's not uncommon in the sense that there were 3 of them plus some 20 different prophets that he spoke through in this way. That's not a lot of people, considering the 10 billion that have, or more, that have come this way, with 8 billion even here today. There's only one who serves as God's call voice. And you might say, wait a minute, why doesn't God just speak directly? Why would he want to speak through a person, particularly someone like yourself? And the answer to that question is found early in the Exodus. Do you recall? Are you familiar with what the children of Israel told Yahweh before they even left Towrah? Well, let me just tell you that story so you understand why God is speaking through someone like myself. Yahweh told Moshe that for credibility's sake, he thought that it would be appropriate for him to come off of the summit of the mountain. And that if Moshe would gather all of the children of Israel together, give them 3 days to get their act together, get all cleaned up, be presentable so they felt more comfortable in God's presence, that Yahweh would come down and he would stand alongside Moshe and he would speak to the people directly to affirm that the one person he had chosen to speak through his cold voice was Moshe, and that what Moshe said comes directly from Yahweh. So Yahweh did that, and the children of Israel didn't say, hey, wow, this is great, man. Here we got God, Yahweh, in our very presence, the creator of the universe. He freed us from slavery and Mitzrayim. He delivered us from that terrible abuse that we were having. He perpetrated those 10 plagues to convince Pharaoh to let us go. He opened and parted the seas for us to cross. As soon as we got here, he delivered a fountain of water for us. He's feeding us while we're here and providing us with just amazing quality teaching and guidance. He explained how the universe was created to Moshe and Bereshith, and how the covenant was formed through Abraham and Sarah and Yishak. Oh my goodness, even how the children of Israel came to be through Yishak, and then through Jacob, and through the children that the sons that were born unto him. And what a marvelous story that was delivered in Bereshith at the very beginning of this. And here they are, and God himself is coming down to the man that has liberated them through this process and spoken to them throughout. And that was not their response. that would have been my response if I was there. I would have been just so ecstatic to have this opportunity. I think we were the luckiest people in the history of the planet, but that's not how they responded. You know how they responded? If you're a Jew, you need to know this. You told God to shut up and go away, that you never wanted to hear from him again or see him again, that his brilliance was too much for you, and that his voice was too powerful for you, and you didn't want to ever hear it again or see him again. Pretty sad, but that's what you said. And Yahweh didn't go away and pout, and he didn't say, well, damn you, then I'll find somebody else to lead. He didn't even condemn the statement. He said, agreed. I happen to agree with your sentiment here. We won't do it that way again, at least for a very, very long time. Why? Because, well, you're already irascible. You know, by this time you'd made a complete mess of everything with the golden calf, and had already turned to being religious. Moshe's own brother, Aaron, led the stupidity. And so God says, it's not a problem. You're not any fun to be around anyway. You're obnoxious. I'd much rather speak through someone that I can relate to, that isn't obnoxious, that will represent my interests as they pertain to you. So at that point, God made the determination that he would speak through individuals like Moshe, and the three most prolific to communicate God's testimony: Moshe, Dod, his beloved son, and Yada, Dod's herald. These are the individuals. So today, it is the final Bashar herald that Yahweh is using to convey his voice. And that is the reason why it is this way. Now, you could say, okay, I get it. We were obnoxious. God's not speaking directly to us anymore, which also means that the Talmud is absolute rubbish, that there is no oral Torah, and that Judaism is a complete farce because God is not speaking to you. He said, go. You told him to go away and shut up. So there is, under that basis, no validity of any kind for the oral law, and therefore for the Talmud, or for any Torah other than the Torah communicated through Moshe. Full stop. It's a death note to Judaism. So why then did God go from 1,000 years of communicating through Yehudim and Israelites to this person now by God's directed mission, and probably 1,000 times, is a goy? Now, first, you shouldn't be all that surprised. God comes full circle in almost everything he presents. We started in the garden. We're going to return to the garden. We started in a personal relationship with Yahweh. We're going to return to a personal relationship with God. We began with his Torah teaching. We will end with his Torah teaching being written inside of us. God loves to come full circle. Adam and Chava, they weren't Jews. Noach and his family, they weren't Jews. Abraham and Sarah, they were Babylonians. So was Yishak. So was Esau and Jacob. The first person to be considered a Yisraelite was Jacob, and therefore his sons. And the first to be a Jew was Yahud. And even then, that name was prophetic, because it is a compound of Yahweh's name and Dod's name. Yahud. It means beloved of Yah. And so all of the initial players are goy. And so the person who would herald Dod's return as the ultimate Yehud, he'd be a goy. He is a nakar, a nakri, unobservant foreigner. He is the man from Edom. And if you know what Edom represents, it is a derivative of Esau. And Esau was Jacob's brother. He brings healing back to God's people, and between God's people and God himself. And so, to finish this story of why not a Yehud after all of the long period of Yisraelites and Yehud, it's not just that God comes full circle in all of his stories and his coming back to a goy because he began with goy. It's because there wasn't a single Yehud, not a single Yisraelite who would listen to him. Not one. When you told him to go away and shut up, you never wanted to see him or hear from him again, you didn't change. You didn't change over 3,450 years. He still won't mention his name. He won't acknowledge his beloved son. You prefer the rabbinical Talmud to his Torah. You prefer to be religious as opposed to engage in the relationship that he intended for you. You're estranged. And since God couldn't, over the chasm of time, find a single Yehud who would listen to him from 2,500 years ago, 547 to be exact, BCE, until 24 years ago, he could not find a single person, and certainly no Jew that would listen to him. If you want to know why I was chosen for this job by Yahweh, he makes it very clear that he chose me for this job, and then he enabled me to do this job. It is because I was willing to do the job, and no one else was. And you need to know, this is no easy task For 24 years, I have spent every waking moment doing this. 6 and 7 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. Every day. Doing this. And there is no worldly compensation. I give all the books away for free. I don't charge anybody anything. I actually wrote today on both Facebook and on X. I said, if it were different, if God decided that these books were not a gift, all of this Yada Yahowah series that you see behind me, books like this, if they were not a gift to you and offered freely online, and we charged $1,000 a piece for them, wouldn't your soul be worth it? But we don't. They're all free. They are, as he said right here, this is a gift for you. But it's not just that Yahowah said, all right, there is a goy out there that is willing to listen to me. He is willing to do what I want done, which means I got this job, some might say, and I will also admit by default. There was no one else standing in line. There was no one else competing for it. In fact, and all of this time along the way, there is no one who has been in a competitive role that says, I think I can do a better job. Doesn't exist. And over this time, I have certainly proven that these 1,000 prophecies pertain to what we're doing collaboratively. But it's more than that. It really is. It's not just a willingness when no one else was. It's not just that there was no one else through whom God could communicate, who would listen and then respond. God has a number of attributes and attitudes that he finds useful and those that he does not like. And so if you were to look at Moshe and Dod as examples, or even individuals like Elia and Yeshaya, Isaiah and Elijah, David and Moses, what you're going to find among those individuals is that they are bright. They have significant intellectual prowess. They are fascinated, not only learning, coming to know, but making the connections to understand. They love Yahowah. They love learning. And once they learn something, there's just something in them that boils out of them that says, I want to share with everyone what we have just discovered. And so these individuals also have courage. They're uncompromising. They're steadfast. They're fighters. To a large extent, they're rogues. Lovable rogues, nonetheless. But there are attributes that God cherishes. Steadfastness is certainly one of them. Being willing to go the course. Being faithful in the sense of not wavering away from what God wants done. Reliable, just will stick to the job. And so those characteristics were manifest in Moshe, they were manifest in Dod, and to a large extent, I have the same. That's why these books are not only behind me and a opportunity to learn in an amplified fashion what Yahowah had to say as corrected for the Dead Sea Scrolls and scrubbed to the diacritical markings of the Masoretes. By connecting things, there are thousands upon thousands of insights that are not only previously unheralded, but profound. And the most profound of them is that through what we are doing together, Yahowah has very clearly conveyed who he is, what he's offering, and what he expects in return. So Yahowah will have offered by having given his coal voice to the presence of his especially capable and influential one, Jewel Hugh, of his the one that he has chosen that has the ability, the strength, the character, and the competence to endure, even through times of travail, when there is terror and trouble all around. God says that he found someone that would stand in the midst of that and yet prevail. Now, it's interesting in this regard that Yahowah asked me to begin where anybody else would have died. His first request of me 24 years ago was to expose and condemn Islam. And I wrote a book called Prophet of Doom. Many of you have heard of it. Many of you have read it. It was published well over 20 years ago. And it was the most effective book at its time to demonstrate, using Muhammad's and Allah's own words, that Islam is a terrorist dogma, that Islam cannot be tolerated for humanity to survive, that Allah was not a God, that Muhammad was not a prophet, that he was the most disgusting human being that ever lived. And that has subsequently become the 5 volumes of goddamn religion. For doing so, I've received thousands of death threats. For doing so, I spent now probably 6 years of my life in hell. When one studies the perversity of Allah and Muhammad, it's like walking into hell. And so no one in the history of the Jewish people has ever stood so firmly in the midst of the terrorists who are trying to perpetrate genocide against them, to stop them, to hold them accountable, push them back, to give God's people the tools they need to recognize that their battle is not with Hamas or Hezbollah or with Iran or Islamic Jihad or the Islamic State or Fatah or the PLO. Their battle is against Islam, and that Islam declared war on them 1,400 years ago, perpetrating apartheid and genocide against God's people. And I know exactly how it all transpired, and I can prove that it was the rabbis that gave the Quran this veneer of religiosity that enabled what was nothing but a terrorist enterprise, a criminal enterprise, to emerge as a religion because of what the rabbis had done. Yes, I've stood in the midst of trembling and terror and torture, and had the character and competence to prevail and offer you that result. I've done the same thing for Christianity, completely and totally disproving the Christian New Testament and the myth of Jesus, so that you might know the truth of David, the beloved of Yahowah, his firstborn son, our Messiah and King. Yes. And also, having written these 35 books on translating the Torah and prophets and Mizmor, so that you might understand God's message to you, Yahowah will have offered, now has offered, having given his cold voice to the presence of his especially capable and influential one, who will stand firm even in the midst of terrible troubles and torture for God's people. I will continue to stand here in your midst through the Shabat harvest, and will return sometime thereafter, most certainly prominent by the 4th of April of 2030, which is the first of Abib of that year, when I will join Elia on the Temple Mount in the midst of the most torturous time in Israel's history. And ultimately, I will be the one that is tortured by the corporeal manifestation of Hasatan on Towrah, the day of the herald, in 2033 or 6,000 Yah, to purge the adulterous woman that has become Yisrael, so that she can be betrothed to her king, the returning David. And this is because exceedingly great is his mercy and favoritism. It's not my mercy that matters. It's not my favoritism that matters. It's not my acceptance of God's offer that matters. It's God has given his voice to this capable individual as a gift because Yahweh is exceedingly great, because Yahweh is tremendously merciful, and he views his people as his favorite. He wants them to ponder the implications of his compassion and favoritism for them. Indeed, a potent and powerful force is the one who engages and acts upon his word. I've shared with you that from the beginning, our process together would be to go where his words lead. We would take passages like this and we would translate them for you in this amplified form so that we could follow not only where his words lead, but so that we could become an exceedingly potent and powerful force by acting upon what God has revealed to us through his prophets, his Debar words, making this truly valuable, important, and the enterprise that we're engaged in, capable and competent. It's exceedingly significant, magnificent from God's view. In its magnitude and extent, it's from Gadol. Now, all the things he has just said about our collaboration together, he says is related to what follows. The day of Yahweh will be exceedingly awesome. Do you understand the connection between these things? Have you ever pondered what we're considering right now and what is the connection of this? This is being conveyed to us by either the second or third last of the prophets known as Zechariah, Yoel, and Malachi, with Malachi conveying his testimony in 447 BCE, 1,000 years after Moshe began to convey the Torah. And so there's the possibility that it was Yoel. Yoel means Yahweh is God. Zechariah, which has two meanings. One is remember Yah. The other is the most memorable man of Yah. And Malachi means my messenger. Those are the last three of the prophets. This is from Yoel, Joel 2:11. Have you ever thought about that transition from God's talking about empowering a person through his words, becoming a potent force, of God conveying his exceedingly great mercy and favoritism through an individual through whom he is projecting his voice? That this individual who he is attesting is especially capable and influential, both in character and competence, and during a time of great travail, trembling, and terror. 2, the day of Yahweh will be exceedingly awesome. I know what he's talking about. Do you know what he's talking about? I'm overjoyed by what he is talking about. I'm relieved by what he's talking about. I'm empowered and enriched by what he is talking about. And you should be too. When God goes from one thing to another like this without an obvious transition, it is because the transition is obvious. The day of Yahweh is exceedingly awesome because God did these things. Because God found somebody through whom he could project his voice. Because their collaboration is awesomely great. Because God is tremendously merciful, and he is projecting that mercy through this individual. And because we have become a potent and powerful force by acting upon Yahweh's words, becoming valuable and important in this day. And that results in the day of Yahweh becoming exceedingly awesome. Without all of this effort, the day of Yahweh doesn't exist. Do you know what the day of Yahweh is? What all of this is leading to? Why God says that him speaking through this individual, making him his voice at this time, is so vitally important? It's because David, the king of Israel, by his own admission, would live 3 lives. By Yahweh's admission, also 3 lives. He was called the Son of God 3 times. He was anointed Messiah 3 times. He lived his first life as the beloved Son of God, as the Messiah, as the King of Israel, and as a great prophet, and a defender and unifier of God's people. And during that first life, he wrote all about what he would achieve in his second, and Yahweh told him what would happen in his third. He wrote vociferously about suffering, crucifixion, to fulfill Passover, and what his soul would endure to carry our guilt away on Matzah, and how this would lead to the great celebration and enrichment and empowerment of becoming firstborn children into God's family on Bikurim. But you see, God's people don't know any of that. They've denied it. In fact, it's their denial of it that led to Bar Kokhba, the false Messiah perpetrated by the founder of Judaism. That alone ought to be enough to cause every Jew to give up Judaism, to renounce it. The founder of rabbinical Judaism, Akiba, foisted a false Messiah, Bar Kokhba, for whom you parade around under that 6-pointed star, because he was the son of a star. There's no star associated with David. David has a symbol. It is the Lion of Judah. God has a symbol. It's the 7-candle menorah, that menorah that is spinning over my shoulder. That's the symbol of David. The menorah is the symbol of Yahweh. And so that was just the first 3,000 and then 4,000 years of the story, but there's another 2,000 years. You see, the rest of the story is being told by the voice who speaks on behalf of Yahweh. Because there wasn't a single Yehud in all the world who knew that David was the actual Messiah and Son of God, who was crucified in 33 CE to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. And if you don't know that, you aren't going to be there at the great and wonderful, exceedingly awesome day of Yahweh. There's no one going to be there. After the fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Towrah comes Shabuah. It is a harvest. That's why we're doing this program. It's a Qatsyr-Harvest. Qatsyr-Harvest. Shabuah. Fulfillment occurs 7 years prior to Yahweh's return with David. What is Shabuah called? Clue, 7. 7 years before Yahweh and David return, which is in 2033, is 2026. Shabuah falls on a Shabat, the 22nd of May of that year. Just 12 months from now. Next is the unfulfilled Moed Mikra of the 7, is a day that Jews know nothing about anymore. They've even replaced it. They call Teruah the day of the herald. Rosh Hashanah, which is the Babylonian head of the year. But it's on Towrah, the day of the herald, 23rd of September, 2033, that the final ingathering of God's people will occur, where God's people, as they will be on Shabuah, on Towrah also, they'll be raised up, coming into the presence of God, being taken literally from all of the death and horror that's transpiring on this earth, the corruption as derived from religion and politics, and brought into God's perfect presence. And then on the following day, on the Shabat of Towrah, to the backdrop of a full solar eclipse, we will then experience the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah to protect this final remnant, this mortal remnant of God's people, so that they have the opportunity to enter the millennial celebration of Sukkah upon Dod's return with Yahowah on Yom Kippurim. And so Yom Kippurim is the great homecoming. It is the family reunion. It's also the great wedding. And that's the purpose of the red heifer, the Adamah Parah, to prepare the adulterous woman that is Yisrael to be betrothed to her beloved king, Dod, who, as we read in Zechariah, is coming with Yahowah. And this mortal remnant will look up at the one that they have pierced and weep for him as a firstborn. This is the future Yisrael. This is marvelous news, though, because it says that the day of Yahowah will be exceedingly awesome. And what that means, my friends, whether you listen to me or not, there will be those who do, and we will prevail. We will prevail with or without you. My preference would be that it would be with everyone who is willing to disavow Judaism and any other religion, including Christianity and Islam, of course, who will disavow their politics and no longer be loyal to liberals or right-wingers, and who will be receptive to returning to Yahowah, listening to all God has to say, appreciating the 5 conditions of the covenant, and celebrating the 5 benefits as they are delivered through David's sacrifice on Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, so that you can all rise with us up into the 7th dimension to be with Yahowah. And it is because our collaboration is productive, and it's because there will be many of you who choose to listen, even if it's 1 in 100,000 of you and only 1 in 1,000,000 people worldwide. We prevail because Yahowah's homecoming with Dod on Yom Kippurim, October 2nd, 6:22 p.m. as the sun sets in Jerusalem on the Day of Reconciliations, 2033. It's going to be exceedingly great. And it's marvelous. It's wonderful for whoever is lifted up and carried away with him and by him. You have 2 opportunities to be lifted up and carried away with me and by me. Shabuah and Towrah. They just happen to be the bookends for the time of Jacob's troubles, this time of Yisrael's confinement and abuse, when, according to the prophet Yoel, it's going to be worse for Jews during this time than at any time in Jewish history, which means worse even than the Holocaust. Worse even than what Rabbi Akiba brought on Jews by foisting a false Messiah Bar Kokhba upon them and bringing the wrath of Rome and Hadrian upon Judea. as he was the one who caused the land to be renamed Palestine as an ethnic slur, genocidal slur, actually. He's the one who caused the diaspora that led directly to the Holocaust. He is the one who failed to recognize that there was a Messiah and that he'd come 100 years prior to that in 33 CE, just as he had foretold. And because Rabbi Akiba failed his people in that way, Christianity was allowed to grow. And Christianity turned out to be the most menacing religion of God's people, because the Christian New Testament demonizes Jews, dehumanizes Jews. It robs Jews of everything, from their Messiah to their God to their salvation to all the promises God made on behalf of his people. That would not have been possible had Rabbi Akiba simply listened to what God said. Had he done what I have done and written a book like Twistianity to disprove Christianity and to prove that Dowd is the Messiah, life would be marvelous. There would have been no Holocaust. There would have been no diaspora. Well, this statement begins with Yoel acknowledging Yahweh's name, something Yisrael must accept going forward to survive this horrifying Islamic assault that is not only ongoing when the rockets fly over Israel and detonate in Haifa and in Tel Aviv. They are sent by Muslims. And as you plead for regime change in Iran, since you can't beat Iran in an all-out war because you can't invade Iran and project a force that can occupy Iran, your only hope of prevailing in this war is for regime change. And yet there's no example of regime change in the Islamic world producing a better result. It's always worse. So what now? You're being attacked again by Islam. That's who is sending those missiles. That's who funded and inspired the Muslims who perpetrated October 7th. That's who funded and armed and inspired Hezbollah. Hezbollah is Allah's party. They 3, 4, 5,000 Muslims that invaded Israel on 10/7 were screaming, Allahu Akbar. Well, this is why Yada Yahowah is boldly presented on the cover of every book I have written, to share these translations of the prophets from Moshe to Malachi over that 1,000 years from you and for you, including my beloved Yeshaya, Isaiah, and now one of my very favorites, Yoel, Yahweh's God. We are revealing not only what they said, but making it pertinent in your life right now at this moment. It is why Yahweh's name is the subject of the songs Dowd and I have written for Yisrael. This does not say, however, that Yahweh will speak to his people at this time, but rather, he, Nathan, will bring about and produce, appointing, enabling, and assigning as a gift his call, his voice, to someone whom he can project it upon, who is particularly bold, courageous, and competent. Now, with this promise extrapolated from the call stem and the perfect conjugation, we know that there is a genuine relationship anticipated between Yahweh and his call, the one who will speak for him, which should be interpreted literally, and that God's message through the gift of his assigned voice will be complete, lacking nothing, in addition to the realization that he will speak at the proper time. Now, it should be obvious to everyone listening to these words that Dowd's contributions to the wellness of his people and the well-being of the covenant family would be unknown today if it were not for the uniqueness of these books, this program, and the collaboration that Yahowah has begun and is continuing through me. If it were not for Yada Yahowah, no one would Yada be familiar with or be able to capitalize upon the Shabuah or the Towrah harvest. They would go without a single soul being received into God's loving arms. No one would Yada be familiar with. No one would capitalize upon these two ingatherings. They would go completely unfulfilled. There would be no homecoming or family reunion on Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations, because there would be no one anticipating Dod's return to anoint the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. The Haredim would still be twirling chickens above their heads while afflicting themselves. The son's sacrifices for his people would all be for naught, because they would not be known. God's story does not have a happy ending without giving voice to his Moedim, his eternal witnesses to the restoring testimony, without someone heralding his son's accolades and accomplishments. And this is why Yada Yahowah matters not just to you, but also to Yahowah. He cares deeply about our collaboration. Now, should you think that I'm exaggerating on any of this, then it's up to you to explain why all of these prophecies permeate God's testimony, like the ones we've just read. Can you explain away what Moshe said about this? That what Dod revealed, what Solomon offered in his speech at the commencement of the house of Yahweh's name? Or that even there is an entire chapter in Yashayah devoted to the Choder, and most of the book is a textbook on how to properly perform the role of a Choder and how to respond to him. And even Dod devoted an entire mashal, word picture, to the same individual. Why, when Moshe failed and gave up on the people and told God, I can't do this. Not only can't I do it, no one can do this. These people are impossible. I quit. You might as well just kill me. Why did God at that time tell Moshe that there's two people that are going to be filled with his spirit and that they would prevail? And that their names were Eldod, Yahweh's, the Almighty's Dod, and Medod, the one who would herald Dod's message. Please explain how Yisrael would have somehow figured this out after 2 millennia of not knowing any of it. Not knowing Yahweh's name, not knowing what Dod had achieved, not even knowing that he was the Son of God and the Messiah and the returning King, or that he fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim. Not even knowing the timeline that we were just now 8 years, 100 months before God's return, that we're 12 months before the Shabuah harvest. Understand what it is pertains to this harvest, what pertains to the Towrah harvest, what the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, the red heifer, is all about, who it perfects, when, why, what happens on Yom Kippurim. You wouldn't know any of it. And if you didn't know any of it, you couldn't accomplish or benefit from any of it. So either I get your attention or you don't make it off this planet alive. Now, while Yahowah is completely vested in this mission, and while he has more to say about it than most anything else, it's because the role of the Kol voice is restorative to this relationship. And this is only about Yada in the sense of what the word means, to know. Yahweh wants Yehudim to know him, Yada Yahowah, to acknowledge his son, to be aware of what is going to occur so they don't miss these final opportunities to come home. That is to say, I am the messenger, not the message. I am the messenger, not the message. Yahweh, Dod, Moshe, they comprise the message. I'm simply delivering it to you as the messenger. I am the herald, not the king. I am the moon because I am reflecting the sun's brilliance. He is the branch and I am but a stem off of it. And even then, as vital as Dod is to our well-being, he is but a reflection of his Father, our God, Yahweh. And therefore, there is nothing more important than Yada, Yahweh. Well, now that we have reflected on the meaning of Yahweh, Nathan, gift, and Kol, voice, let's consider La Pene, for the presence and to the presence of this individual to provide a face and a mouth that will appear before you, to project the voice of God. The prophet reveals that the one conveying Yahweh's message will be Chil. He's going to be especially capable and influential. Boy, does both Dod and Yeshaya Isaiah make this point over and over again as they write about the Towrah. And should you wonder how it is possible that he will demonstrate such character and competence amid such travail and terror, you read Yeshaya 11, where God explains that the Towrah, this secondary branch, will be enlightened and enabled by his seven spirits. No one previously, no one after this time, will be the recipient of Yahweh's seven Ruach, including the very spirit of Yahweh. And while Chael is commonly rendered as army in English translations, that rendering is an extrapolation of the term's core meaning, describing a capable, influential, and effective force. Further, since the actionable root of Chael is Tul, the expression of Yahweh's voice will be during a time when God's message has been twisted and his people are tormented and terrorized. The reason Yahweh has offered this gift to his people is because of Makane Hu, because of his mercy, because of his favoritism. Makane is a compound of Ma to ponder the implications of Chana, which is camping out, abiding and growing. It in turn is predicated upon Chan, which is favor and acceptance. It also appears related to Chinta, which is wheats, the intended harvest on Shabuah. And so that you are aware, English Bibles typically divorce Makena of its rich etymological root and render it as camp. So while camping out with Yahweh will be great, if that is what God intended to say on this occasion, I think he would have used Sukkah, camping out, and brought our attention to the final Moed. But he didn't, because the voice is projected prior to Teruah and Kippurim. And Kippurim is the great and awesome day of Yahweh, which makes Sukkah possible. Therefore, it would have been premature. Now, the rest of the words, of course, are straightforward in their meaning and are properly defined as I have translated them. Indeed, a potent and powerful force is he who engages and acts upon his word. truly valuable and important, capable and competent, empowering and magnifying. The day of Yahweh will therefore be exceedingly awesome for whoever is lifted up and carried away by him. Well, I thank you for listening. We have so much more to reveal from Yoel as we go further into this text, but very few things are more pertinent to our time, particularly as Israel is engaged in 2 wars, and the very survival of the nation is at risk and at stake. It's nice to know how the story ends, as well as what will transpire between then and now, as well as who Yahweh wants you to listen to during this time of travail. He is Yada. I am Craig Winn, and this has been an episode of the YAHOWAH blog.